Hello everyone, welcome back again to my YouTube channel. My name is Osereme, and in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you guys how to go about the cutting of this very beautiful bustier blouse with a stylish yoke inspired by stitches by IC. This is what mine looks like after I was done cutting it out, which you guys are going to be seeing in this video. In my next tutorial I'm going to be sharing with you guys how to join these pieces together and make it into a blouse. So if you're interested in learning how to go about this cutting, please keep on watching and let's get started. So guys, for this tutorial, you're going to be needing two different fabrics. You would need about 1.5 yards of each, or you can get 1 yard of each of them depending on your size. So these are the two different fabrics I'm going to be using for this tutorial. So let's go ahead and start drafting our pattern. So guys, my pattern paper is in a fold. As you can see, this is very necessary because of the type of yoke we are going to be cutting out for the front. So once you folded your pattern paper into two, first thing you're going to do is to draw a straight line across the top of your paper, which is going to serve as your starting line, and is also the same thing as your shoulder line. So guys, once you've drawn this out, all our other measurements are going to be taken from the shoulder line here. So now from this shoulder line, I'm going to measure down to my bust. So shoulder to bust point measurement for me is 10 inches. I marked it here. Still leaving the tape at the shoulder, I marked my under bust, which is 13, and then my waist, which is 15.5. And then lastly, I'm going to be marking the length I want this blouse to be. Normally after waist, the next line you're supposed to draw is the hip line. But because this is a blouse, I don't want it to get all the way to my hip. I'm going to be marking this at 21 inches, which is the length I want my blouse to be. So once you're through with this, just go ahead and draw straight line across all the points that you have made. Let me take you back to a time when love was as precious. So now I'm going to label the shoulder line here. This is the bust line, under bust line, waistline, and then this is my hemline. So next we are going to take all our other measurement from the folded center. So on the shoulder line here, I'm going to go in by 3 inches for my neck width, and then I'll come down by 3 inches as well for my neck depth. I'm going to connect these 2 points together with my curve to give me a round neckline. After drawing out your neckline, the next thing you're going to do is to divide your shoulder measurement by 2. Still taking your measurement from the center fold, I marked it here on the shoulder line, and I'm going to come down from that point by 1 inches. This is for my shoulder slope. So I'm going to connect from this new point to the top of my neckline. So this is going to give you your shoulder. Now the next thing you're going to do is to determine your armhole depth. And to determine that, you're going to divide your bust measurement by 6 and add 1.5 to whatever you get. So I did the calculation here. My bust measurement divided by 6 is 5.5. Okay. Now 5.5 plus 1.5 inch is equal to 7. So 7 inches is my armhole depth. So you are going to do the same calculation for whatever your bust measurement is. So now from this shoulder slope, I'm going to come down by that 7 inches, and I'm going to mark it here. And I will draw a straight line across this point, and this new line is going to be my chest line. Now from the shoulder slope, I will draw a straight line to meet the new line I just got, which is the chest line. So just like I'm doing here. And then after that, you're going to get the midpoint of these 2 points. So from the shoulder slope to the chest line, you're going to measure what you have, and you're going to get the midpoint. So I'm just doing this by dividing my tape into 2. I got the midpoint, and I'm going to go in from that point by 1/2 inch. Once you're through with that, on the chest line, you're going to divide your bust measurement by 4 and make a point. And once you're through with that, you will connect all the 3 points you just got with your curve to give you your armhole. So now the next thing is to go in by half of your nipple to nipple measurement. So on the bust line, under bust line, waistline, and on the hemline, half of your nipple to nipple measurement. So half of my nipple to nipple measurement is 3.5. So I'm marking it on the bust line, under bust line, waistline, and hemline. And I'll connect all these points together with a straight line. So next you're going to come over to the shoulder, and you're going to measure what you have here. So what I had here after doing my measurement was about 4 inches. So I'm going to divide it into 2 equal halves as well. And from this point, I'll connect the straight line to meet the bust point. Next, from the chest line here, I'm going to go up by 1 inch. This is now going to be my new neckline because I want this bustier area to be a little bit covered. You can go up by more than 1 inch depending on how covered you want the bustier area of your blouse to be. So I just came up by 1 inch here and I draw it to meet the armhole. So this is now my new neckline. Now I'm going to come down to the under bust line and I'm going to take in my darts. So what I'm going to do is on the part going towards the center of my blouse, I am going to be taking 3/4 of an inch on all the lines below the under bust. So from the under bust to the waist and to the hem. So I'm taking 3/4 of an inch. I'm using 3/4 of an inch here because I'm not busty at all. I've noticed that whenever I use 1 inch, the bustier is always a little bit too big for my bust. So now I use 3/4 of an inch here. I am a size 6, so it's actually understandable that mine is very small. But I would advise you to use 1 inch for this particular part because that works for most people. Now on the other side, I'm going to be using 1 1/4 inch. Now for most people, I will advise you to use 1 1/2 inch, or you can use 2 inches if the person is very busty. But if the person is not very busty, what works for most people is 1 1/2 inch. So now for this first line we drew, I am going to be going out by 1 1/4 inch for myself. Like I said, please, I'm repeating this. If you're not very small, please use 1 1/2 inch here. So I'm marking it on all the lines, under bust line, waistline, and on the hemline. And I'm also going to join all of them together like you see me doing like this. So once you're through with this, the next thing you're going to do is to connect from these points to meet the bust line. When you're doing this, please make sure that it's not too pointed. You can see I'm using my curve so that it's not pointed on the bust points. So now the next thing I'm going to do is to come to this neckline that we drew earlier, and I'm also going to be taking that here. So on both sides of this line, I am going to be marking 3/4 of an inch. But for most people, 1 inch on both sides is perfect. So for me, I'm using 3/4 of an inch on both sides, and I'm just going to use my curve to connect them to the bust point as well. Please notice how my bust point is not looking too pointed. I noticed from my online class when people do things like this, it's always very pointed and it doesn't come out nice when you actually sew it together. So make sure that it's curved and not actually pointed. Okay. So now on the chest line, you're going to take your bust measurement divided by 4. I already marked it to get the armhole. So now I'll measure the dart intake that I have in between that line and replace it back. This is going to prevent your bustier from being too tight at the top. If you don't replace it, it will be too tight. Now coming to the waistline, I'll mark my waist measurement divided by 4 and I'll measure the dart intake that I have here, which was about 1 1/4 inch, and replace it back as well. Now on the hemline, I'm going to mark my hip measurement divided by 4. I'm going to mark it here and also replace the dart intake that I have here. So I'll replace it outside here as well. So now I'm going to be joining all the last points to give me my body shape. So from the armhole here, I'll connect all the way to the waist, and from the waist, I'll connect to the hip. So guys, this area here is going to be cut out, and this area as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and use my marker to draw this neckline so that it's more visible. So once you're through with this is something that I've never really done on this channel before, but I just want to do it today because I've noticed that whenever I make my yoke, it's always bigger than the bustier by the time we're done with everything. So this is something I learned recently. It's called yoke tightening. So from the dart here, I'm going to connect to the top of the shoulder. Can you see what I did? And I'll do the same thing on the other side as well. So I'm doing this on the yoke area and I'm going to be cutting out this part. I'll be showing you guys how I'll go about the joining of that part later because we need it to be full for our yoke. So I'm just going ahead now to cut out the body of the blouse, and I'll also cut out the neckline and the yoke area as well. Also, I'm cutting away the darts because it's not going to be needed anymore. So now for the yoke area, like I said, we are going to be cutting off this area here. So I'll just cut it out on one side like this. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side as well. So basically, this is what it will look like when you are done taking off the darts. So we are going to be joining this area together like this. So you will need to open up the full yoke like this. I've opened up the full yoke and I've also fully cut out the area that I took away the dart. So I'm arranging everything back and I'm just going to go ahead and tape it down like this. Can you see what I did? And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. You want to make sure that the shoulder remains exactly as it is. so that the shoulder is not shorter than the back when we are trying to join this together. So once you're done taping it down, you should have it looking something like this. So now we are going to go ahead and draw out our yoke. So from the side, I'm going to mark 1.5 inch here, and I'm going to go up by about 4.5 inches. So I'll draw a straight line to connect these 2 points. Okay, I'm doing this on the left side. Now on the right side, I'll also come in by 1.5 inch here, and I'm going to connect a curve to meet this other point. At least this is what I think this yoke looks like. Okay, so I'm going to be using this curve, this other curve, because I feel like it's going to give me a better curve. So from here, I'm just going to connect all the way to meet the top of this 4.5 inches that I went up by. So once this is done, I'm going to go ahead and cut along the lines that I have here to give me my yoke. So guys, this is what the front yoke is looking like after I was done, and this is the body part of the front. Okay, so this is what I have. Now let's go ahead and work on the back. So guys, the back is also very similar to the front. The only difference is before I started drawing out the lines, I drew out a zipper allowance line. And then after that, I drew out my shoulder line, my chest line, my bust line. I didn't draw out an under bust line because this is the back pattern. It's not needed. I also drew out my waistline and I drew out my hemline. So once this is done, I went ahead to draw out a neckline. The neck width was 3 inches and the neck depth was 1.5 inches because I wanted this to be a high neckline at the back. Now from this zipper allowance line, I'm going to measure my dart for the back. So I'm also going in by half of my nipple to nipple measurement, and I'm taking it now on the chest line, bust line, waistline, and hemline. I'm also going to draw a straight line to connect all these points. Now I'm going to be taking in my dart on the waistline. I'm going out on both sides of this line by 3/4 inch. Now from the chest line, I came down by 1 inch, and I'm going to be connecting all these points together to give me my dart. Now from the 1/2 inch on the waist, I connected to the top, and I'm also going to do the same thing on this other side as well, connect to the top. And from the waist, I'm going to measure about 4 inches down or 4.5 inches. You can use 4.5 inches or 5 inches if the person you're making this for is very tall. So for me, I marked 4 inches here, and I'm going to be connecting it to meet the 1/2 inch we came out by earlier as well to give me my back dart. So we are doing a normal dart for the back. So once this is done, I'm just going to go ahead and mark my bust measurement divided by 4 on the bust line. On the waistline, waist measurement divided by 4, and then I'll have to replace my dart back, which was 1 inch, and on the hemline, my hip measurement divided by 4. I'm going to now join all the last points together now to give me my body shape. But I don't wanna play no games, baby. I'll treat you different. So next thing I'm going to do is on the waistline here, I'm going to measure the waist out into the zipper allowance area, and I'm going to go in by 3/4 inch here. You can use 3/4 inch as well. This is going to be for our zipper allowance area so that the zip area is not bulging at the back when we are done fixing our zipper. This is very necessary. So I'm basically connecting from these points to the top and bottom of our blouse, and I'll be cutting off the area that I marked. So now I'm just going to go ahead and cut out this back pattern. So for the back yoke, I'm just going to go ahead and draw a straight line across from the armhole area, from the end of the armhole here. That's the chest line. I'll just make it more visible. And I'm just going to be cutting out from here. So this part I cut away is going to be the yoke. So now because this is the yoke, we don't need the zipper allowance again. So I'm going to be cutting it off as well. Now you can decide to go about your yoke whichever way you want to. So I want mine to look like a half circle when I'm done. So I measured at the end of this yoke, I measured 3.5 inches, and I placed my curve there and drew it a little bit towards the top. And then from where I stopped, I used my curve again to draw to the center. So this is going to give me that C effect I want. Okay, so I'm going to be placing buttons or whatever here at this top. And that's basically it for the drafting out of this back yoke. It's very easy. Now we have the back yoke and the back pattern, then the front yoke and the front patterns. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out all these on my fabric. So I'll be cutting out the yokes on the colorful fabric here, and then I'll be cutting out the body on this other fabric. So I have folded a part of my fabric for the body part into two, and I have this center fold here. So the folded edge is where you'll be placing the center front. So I'm placing it here, and I'm going to go ahead and pin it down. And then I'll also place the side front close to it, but I'll give it about 1.5 inch distance before I place the other one. Okay, and I'm going to also go ahead and pin it down. So once you're done pinning it down, on the center front piece, go ahead and add 1/2 inch all the way around. And for the side front piece, I'm not going to be adding any stitching allowance to the armhole area, but for the top, I'll add 1/2 inch. To the curve, I'll add 1/2 inch. The end here, 1/2 inch, and also this other end, 1/2 inch. Now for the side, we are going to be adding 1.5 inch of stitching allowance because we need enough allowance for the side to join the front and the back together. And then I'll just connect it to the pattern paper. Like I said, I'm not adding any stitching allowance to the armhole. So once it's done, go ahead and cut it out. So this is all for the front pattern. Let's go ahead and cut out the back. For the back, I also have my fabric folded into two, and I'm just going to quickly iron it in place so that it will be easy for me to cut out. And I'm going to place my back pattern on it like this, and I'm going to go ahead and also pin it in place. Now for the back pattern, I'm also going to be adding 1/2 inch stitching allowance all the way around the top, around the zipper allowance area, 1/2 inch as well. And at the end, I'm also going to be adding 1/2 inch as well. Just like I did in front, on the side is where we'll be adding 1.5 inch of stitching allowance. So once you're through adding all the allowances, go ahead and cut it out. So guys, this is the back pattern and these are the front pieces here. Let's go ahead and cut out the yoke. Now for the front yoke, you are going to have to cut it out open like this. You cannot fold it into two because the two sides of the yoke are not the same. So go ahead and arrange your yoke on your fabric like I'm doing now, and then you're going to go ahead and cut it out. I'll be cutting it out with about 1/2 inch stitching allowance all the way around. Now for this yoke, I'm going to also be adding 1/2 inch to the armhole. Remember we did something called yoke tightening earlier. So I'm just going to be adding this just so that the armhole area is not too small. So once you're done cutting out the front yoke, the back yoke is very simple. I have my fabric folded into two here because this is the back and it's the same thing on both sides. Now go ahead and pin your yoke to your fabric as well, and then go ahead and cut it out all the way around with 1/2 inch stitching allowance. For the back yoke, I'm not going to be adding stitching allowance to the armhole area. So guys, this is what I had after I was done cutting out the front and the back yoke, and this is the body part. So when I went ahead to open up the front, this is the yoke and the body of the front. This is what it's looking like. In my next tutorial, I'm going to be joining all of this together and I will show you guys how to go about it. And also I'm going to go ahead and cut out lining pieces for all of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next one.